Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and in this video we're going to talk about my experiment with these three cloud providers. Some of you might want to know, oh, which one is best for me. So this is just my opinion, and it should not be taken in a singularity, which means you can consult other people, and you can also experiment with yourself. Now, I might be biased. I have more experience with AWS, so certainly my opinion might be biased, but it's just my candid opinion experimenting with the three major cloud providers. This experiment is using platform as a service. It does not cover using the VM, and it does not cover using maybe Kubernetes service or some other services. So using the platform as a service. So in AWS, it's Elastic Beanstalk. In Azure, is App Service. In Google Cloud, it's App Engine. The experiment was to know how seamless this platform as a service is, because majority of developers they use this platform as a service instead of using an actual VM. If you're a beginner, it's better you use platform as a service. It's like the easiest in comparison to using VM, infrastructure as a service. I use a basic application which is a Node.js application that connects to a DB. So my front end, which is a static application, should reside on the storage system behind a CDN. The back end should be on a VM that connects to a managed DB MySQL. For AWS, the process of creating bucket is quite straightforward. So AWS is S3, so you can go there, create a bucket. The process is straightforward. For Azure is Azure Blob Storage, so the process is also straightforward. It's easy. For Google Cloud Storage, it is called Cloud Storage. Now, before you start anything in Google, you will need to create an application. That is where Google and Azure tends to be different from AWS. So I like the fact that you can group resources. So Google forces you to group resources, and Azure also forces you to group resources. In Google, so you create a project. In Azure, you create a resource group. But before that, my experience creating profile for Google Cloud and AWS, they are okay, but I don't know, Azure refused to give me a free tier. So actually I registered as a business, as a small business. So for Google, I got a $300 cloud credit, so which I can use to experiment. AWS, some services are free for a year, some are monthly. For Google Cloud, you can access all services for that $300. For AWS, some services are not free, so when you use a service that is not free, you get billed immediately. But what Azure did was there's a free subscription and there's a pay as you go subscription. In the free subscription, you are limited. There are some things you cannot do. In the pay as you go subscription, you just when you use something you pay. So that is one downside to me. That's one downside about Azure. As someone testing the platform, I have to pay for the things I use, the things I'm experimenting with. If you are registering as a business, it's pertinent that preferably you register as a business. Then that is for the registration process. For the front end, AWS calls it S3, Amazon S3 bucket, so you can search for it. Google Cloud calls it Cloud Storage. You can also search, you can just put storage here, and Azure calls it Blob Storage. So you can also search it here. You can use step storage and you click storage account and you can see. everything. So for the creation of the static website and storage, it's straightforward for all of them. Now, but the linking of the static website to CloudFront for AWS, it might be challenging for beginners to wrap their head around CloudFront functions and what to do with it. For Azure, it is straightforward. You don't need to do functions and this kind of stuff. For Google Cloud, the CDN is quite different. Now, how is it different? Number one, Google CDN does not give you a separate URL, unlike Azure and AWS. So the CDN URL, why I feel that is necessary is because you can use it to debug which area of the chain is not working. If I try to access the website using my S3 bucket URL and it's not working, I know the problem is within S3. If I use my CloudFront URL and it's not working and S3 is working, I know the problem is within CloudFront. Google CDN does not have its own standalone URL, and you are forced to put the CDN behind a load balancer, which certainly it will cost you money. That's the downside about Google CDN. One other challenge in the CDN is when you're routing to your custom domain. Google CDN does not offer that. Like I said, you need to put it behind a load balancer. For Azure, the challenge I experienced for Azure is linking is verifying my domain on Azure CDN. So Azure CDN is actually called front door. Verifying my domain in front door was a challenge. So it took a while to verify. Meanwhile, in AWS, it was quite easier to verify domain. Then also for AWS, you can create a wildcard certificate. But for Azure, it's like I'm being forced to create certificates for each domain. I need to go through the verification over and over again. Maybe because I didn't go through the certificate manager route, but in the Azure front door, there was no avenue for me to create or generate a wildcard certificate. So because of that, the domain needs to be revalidated. Like every subdomain needs to be revalidated, and like for AWS, I can validate the root domain, and for subdomain, I don't need to revalidate. Then, for no reason, because one thing I'll always do, one purpose is to compare their pricing. For some reason, Azure bid me $3.56 within a couple of, I think, less than 5 days for using the CDN. So I get bid $3.56 for using CDN, and there wasn't much configuration, so I don't think I clicked or opting for something more. I just have to shut down the resource. So that's one downside of using it, because you can't experiment with it on a free tier level as a business, and this was a kind of pushback for me. So the help service was okay in AWS and in Azure. For Google Cloud, I was forced to change a lot of codes in my Node.js application for it to work. Unlike the same code that works well on AWS wasn't working on Google Cloud. Like in my application, I use cluster, node cluster, and like child processes, which was actually making the application not to run. So I needed to change those things before it was able to run on Google App Engine. Google App Engine actually uses kind of a Docker behind the scene. I feel a lot of things might not really work well. So I don't know why they will use Docker, and they also have Cloud Run, which by default is like Docker. One thing about Google Cloud is unlike AWS that gives you the ability to upload your code using the UI, Google Cloud is pretty much built for developers. It kind of forces you to do things the right way, kind of. I'm not saying uploading application code via UI is bad, but it might be an easy option for a beginner. But Google Cloud doesn't even allow that. You either use a cloud build, which is more like a CI/CD pipeline, or you use a CLI. So you download the Google CLI and you use Google command. You use Cloud to push your code. So, but in AWS for Elastic Beanstalk, you can zip your code, your Node.js code, and upload to the cloud. They also allow CLI and they also allow CI/CD. So you can see I can upload and deploy directly. So it will unzip the stuff and deploy. Then for Google Cloud, there's a challenge with the credentials in the sense that if your application is on production, which means it's already running on the app service, you don't need to give your application credentials to interact with each other. Now, in as much they are within the same application. Now, for AWS, each service needs permission to interact with other services. You need that credential. So for Google Cloud, the downside of that is when you're not running your application, because what I do before I deploy it, I test locally. Now, your application will not run without credentials if you are testing locally. So let's say I want to send email using Google service. I will need the credentials testing locally, but I don't need the credentials testing on production. In that case, you need to tweak your code to adjust for different scenarios. The same thing for DB access and some other services. That actually took making you to tweak your code to adjust for test environment and production environment. Yeah, for some people, that's not really a big deal. In AWS, the credentials are basically the same. So you, what I mean is that if your application is on production, it needs credentials. If it is running locally, it also needs credentials. So you don't need to do kind of a lot of changes for your application, unlike Google Cloud. Then I also have challenges connecting the app engine to Cloud SQL. It wasn't straightforward. Though likewise AWS, but in my opinion AWS is easier. Now for the DB configuration, if you come here in my, I click Google Cloud. So if you see, I've used $35, and I think I used this within a week, kind of. So most of them were the Cloud SQL. It's a managed service, and possibly I didn't do lot of configuration. For me, for budget friendliness, I'll still prefer AWS. But like I said, I have more experience with AWS. Outside AWS, I think I like the way Google Cloud categorizes things. So if I delete, which the same thing Azure does too, so if I delete this project, all the resources under this project will be deleted. The same thing with Azure. When you delete a resource group, all the resources inside the resource group will be deleted. But Google Cloud is more developer focused. One thing that people don't like AWS for is the naming. So let's say I want to use S3 and I don't know the name. I can just search story. Now you will see AWS did not give me S3 here. Nah, and that is a problem because these stuff might be confusing. So you will need to know the service's name too. But in my opinion, it's similar in other cloud platforms. It's pertinent to know the service name in order to be able to use it. So that is just my brief overview about my experiment with the three cloud, and I actually hope to continue this experiment and to try to do more videos for my subscribers as regard to use these three different clouds and how to manage costs on these three different clouds. So that's the reason for this experiment, for you to manage costs for these three different clouds. The $300 on Google Cloud is a big win for startups. So a lot of startups will want that. But I think in the other cloud services, you can apply for credit, and if it is approved for you, you can get the credits and start using it. That's all about my review for the three cloud system, and I hope this review was helpful to you. And please don't forget to subscribe and smash the like button for more content like this. Thank you.